Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak from India. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Charles Spinosa, Emeritus Group Director at Vision Consulting and Principal at Stratam Consulting as our distinguished guest on today's podcast. Dr. Charles brings over 25 years of experience in management consulting, partnering with leaders to transform company cultures, leadership styles, and market offerings into uniquely admired and profitable showcases that redefine industry standards and stakeholder perceptions. Notably, his collaboration with Cemex has been featured by influential thinkers like Dr. Chen Kim and Dr. Rene Murboni in Blue Ocean Strategy, and Dr. C.K. Prala in The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. Dr. Charles authored Disclosing New Worlds and has published over 30 influential articles on leadership, business ethics, and organizational change, including works in the Journal of Business Ethics and the Handbook of Philosophy of Management. Before entering in the consulting field, he served as a visiting faculty of philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley, and held as an assistant professorship in English literature at Miami University, Ohio. His approach reflects strong roots in humanities, shaping both his practice and philosophy. Today, Dr. Charles Spinosa shares insights from his acclaimed book, Leadership as Masterpiece Creation, what business leaders can learn from the humanities about moral risk-taking. It's my pleasure to now welcome Dr. Charles Spinosa to the podcast. Dr. Charles, we are truly honored that you have accepted our invitation and delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Deepak. I'm delighted to speak to you and to your audience. I'm very happy, and I'm especially happy that you're mentioning my book right off, because I think most of you members of your audience would find it very valuable.
Thank you. Dr. Charles, how do humanities uniquely equip business leaders to take the kind of moral risk necessary for creating masterpiece organizations that truly inspire admiration?
Okay, I think there are three main reasons why the humanities serve as a very, very good background for business leaders, and in particular in taking risks. The first is the main question that people in the humanities ask is, what is a good life? Whether you're studying history or whether you're studying literature or whether you're studying philosophy, that's a key question. And you read the various writers and thinkers in terms of what they imagined a good life to be. And if you can understand what they were thinking a good life was, then you can understand their works far better. I believe that what businesses are doing today is not just selling goods. I mean, if you think of advertising at all, they're selling good lives. They're telling you how the goods can come to play a role in your life that makes you experience your life as a whole as a good life. So that's number one. The second thing, and this is the most important one, I think, for leaders, in the humanities, you look at people as having defining passions. That's a notion that came from Kierkegaard, but you can find it from Plato through to Wittgenstein. You can find it, that's the history of philosophy. You can find it in the history of literature from Homer up to today's literature. And a defining passion is what you see that makes your life worth living, what would make it worth dying for. And leaders who have that are much more resilient. They develop strategies for their businesses that enable them and their employees to lead good lives. And they can have much more complicated strategies. I remember the first leader I worked with who told me what his good life was about was Lorenzo Zambrano, who was the CEO of Cemex, which he took from a small Monterrey, Mexico company and developed into the second or third largest cement company in the world. It's global, it's international. What was going to make him a good life for him? He went to Stanford and said, wow, the financial discipline and transparency of the first world is amazing. I can see how first world companies can amass wealth by disclosing what they're doing and therefore having low interest rates. I'm going to bring that to Mexico. And that's what he determined to do and did. But you can't do that simply. There's all sorts of forces standing against it. And so he had a very complicated strategy. And in fact, at one moment, He had to sacrifice that for the sake of being able to enter Spain. And instead of doing what most leaders would do, okay, if I'm going to get the money to enter Spain, I have to fudge details of a loan prospectus, and I'm just going to become a growth company. He went back to his defining passion and spent years showing that he really was financially transparent and financially responsible. And that's what enabled him, sticking to the defining passion, enabled him to grow as he did. And I've noticed, I'd say 80% of the leaders I deal with have defining passions. And those passions are not just prudential, they're moral. They have a moral force in their lives. If they don't do that, do not live up to those passions, they will consider their lives bad. The third thing that I consider very important that comes from my literary background is when you are in the humanities, you look at people as living certain dramas and you see them in terms of the dramatic context. I run into people all the time that say, my CEO told me this, or my manager told me this, or the board members told me this. And they think that it's like they're in a confessional, that the person is telling them their deepest truth. And that's almost never the case. They're practicing lines and rehearsing lines that they also want to tell somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And understanding that whole context and why somebody would say what he says or move in the direction he or she is moving, that's important for just basically understanding what people are doing. And it gives you a richer sense of life. You don't ask just simply, what is that? Is what the person is saying true? You ask also, why would the person be motivated to be saying that to me now? And that's a question that I think comes from the humanities and that people in the humanities ask very naturally. So those are my three big reasons. I can give you lots of small ones, but those are the three big ones for why the humanities are important. The question is a good life. I think businesses need to ask, how are we giving our employees a good life? How are we giving our customers a good life? The question is the defining passion. What am I willing to live and die for? How am I making my company enable that? How am I enabling the good lives of others, the defining passions of others? And three, what's the dramatic situation that people are in?
Very interesting. Dr. Charles, the book discusses leaders like Churchill, Madam C.J. Walker, and Jeff Bezos. What common traits in their moral risk-taking can emerging leaders emulate today?
This is really important. I want to ask, thank you a lot, Pac, for asking me this question. So first of all, I should say what taking a moral risk is. There are moments in our lives where doing the morally right thing, the morally acceptable thing, we can see will not bring us good results. To put it in strictly philosophical terms, doing the morally right thing will not enable people to have good lives, but be successful. In Churchill's day, the morally right thing, the sensible thing was to appease Hitler. Why? Because everybody understood that once Hitler regained the losses brought by World War I in the Versailles Agreement, he would become a gentleman. Why is it? Because everybody wanted to become a gentleman in those days. Churchill was one of the very, very few people who saw that Hitler was ferocious and wanted conquest at all costs. He couldn't get anybody to believe that. So Hitler himself was an anomaly, and how to deal with Hitler was a moral anomaly. The right way to deal with Hitler was not going to bring anybody a good life. I think you mentioned, secondly, Madam Walker. Madam Walker, a lot of people don't know her. She's a particularly American figure. She was the first Black millionaire entrepreneur woman. She didn't develop, she found a way to stimulate hair growth for Black women who had damaged their scalps. She didn't discover it. A woman named Annie Malone discovered it. And Annie Malone was another Black woman who fancied herself as a sort of chemist, and she was a very good chemist. She discovered this way of healing scalps, but she just wanted to sell the product as a useful product that would heal scalps. Whereas Madam Walker, who had lost all her hair, realized that for women this was a miracle, and if she could sell it that way, many, many more women would adopt it, and it would change their lives, and they would then be living lives where they were constantly changing their lives and evolving their lives. And so she essentially stole the formula. It wasn't patented, but she we can say legally stole it and created her own business around it. And that was not the morally right thing to do, but it was a moral risk. And what happened? It created good lives for so many that we gave her a pass. And the same is true for Bezos and the others. They all discovered anomalies. Bezos' anomalies was that the internet was going to take over and ruin retail sales. People would be selling all sorts of fraudulent stuff and options on things, and he was going to save retail in the online world and did with the everything store. So I want to say that what links all these people is they could find a moral anomaly, and it was taking a risk, a moral risk in the face of a moral anomaly. That's the lesson. My book doesn't advocate taking moral risks all the time, helter-skelter. It advocates identifying a moral anomaly, such as Hitler, such as hair growth is just being sold as a neat chemical product, and taking a risk to make it real in some other way. With my consulting clients, the way I bring this to them is I ask leaders, what always goes wrong in your company? That is, when your business model is working, not when things break down. What always goes wrong when your business model is working? And I find that 80% of the leaders can answer me. One leader told me recently, what always goes wrong is we take advantage of our loyal customers. We charge them more so we can offer discounts to bring in new customers. Another one in the video game world said, you know what, Charles? We want to create video games that appeal across gender, to boys and girls, to men and to women. And we think we can do it. But every time we start out doing that and it gets really tough, it's much easier to appeal to the nasty instincts of adolescent boys. And so we go there. And so he's trying to create a video game that appeals across genders. And whatever it is, people in healthcare, we want to be transparent with patients. We want to help them with the insurers in the United States. That's a big thing, helping patients with their insurers. But one or two letters in, we give up on it. It's too costly. So we don't do that. That people can easily find out what always goes wrong. That thing that always goes wrong in your business by virtue of always going wrong, that's the anomaly. And that's the anomaly that you're going to have to take a moral risk to overcome. So there's one other thing that you can get from the humanities. When you're taking moral risks, you're doing something that people think is immoral. The people who do this and do this wisely and successfully do it with fear and trembling. They do it with a sense of how people are judging them and whether they're going too far. Winston Churchill was famous for asking during the Second World War, when he sent people out on bombing missions, are we becoming beasts? Are we being beasts? And he had to answer, no, we're not, that the cost of war required what he was doing. And it's that kind of question that Madam Walker, that Jeff Bezos, that all the moral risk takers, Anita Roddick is another one I like, Anita Roddick of The Body Shop. Am I doing something too beastly? And that's what keeps them within bounds. That's the other thing I would say about the common traits of these moral risk-taking leaders. I should also say Andrew Fastow, who was Enron's CFO, took moral risk and did not ask that question. And that's how things go really bad. I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No problem. Dr. Charles, how can leaders balance the tension between convenience, efficiency, and safety in the pursuit of infinite commitments or moral passion in their organizations?
Okay, my first answer to that, Deepak, is hire me or people like me. But that's a facetious answer. Let me take the leader, Julia Robertson, who transformed the recruitment industry, or think of it as a temp worker industry. She realized that the temp worker industry was an industry focused on just getting cheap labor into seats and pulling them away, just so that there could be a flexible workforce. It didn't take care of workers, and it just made sure that workers of minimal standard were in those seats. She saw that as wrong. She wanted people, employers, even with temp workers, to be developing the workers and the workers to be developing. And she set out to change the industry to do that. Now, that's a huge change in the industry. You're changing the whole economic model, both of her own industry and of the people who are using, of her customers, the people who are using temp workers. So what she did, uh, with the help of my colleagues, was she took a series of moral risks. She had to take 3 moral risks. And the idea was to take the smallest moral risk first, take the next largest moral risk second, and take the largest moral risk third. That's sort of the simple answer to your question. What we did was we had inside her company, promises were quite deceitful in that industry. You tried to make a promise to take advantage of somebody else. We had her deploy inside her company and with their customers honest to goodness promises that were win-win promises to people. People rebelled against that. She had to fire some people. But that was the first thing. That was, we thought, the simplest one. The next one was she only wanted to have customers that were going to develop the employees, and she started letting go of customers who were not going to do that. That was a good deal harder. That would have economic consequences that could be quite harmful. She took the chance. She made that happen. That's a step up from promise taking. And third, she got rid of all the gray area financial practices inside her industry. This was huge because all sorts of things like not giving temp workers vacation pay and so forth. There were a number of practices like that. That seemed to many people to be the backbone of profitability in the industry. She eliminated those, and that was the third thing that she did. So she took them in increasing order. So that's the first thing you do. How can you maximize safety while taking moral risks? Well, small moral risks, larger moral risks, and larger moral risks. I have to say, some of the people that I think of as great moral risk takers didn't do that. Anita Roddick, her second moral risk, selling half her company against her CFO and husband's advice in order to start growing, get the money for growth. That was the largest moral risk she ever took. She took it second. You can get away with it if you're a moral risk-taking genius like Anita Roddick. But she certainly was not maximizing safety as she did it. So the first thing is take your moral risks in order. The second thing is listening to Winston Churchill and ask, am I a beast? Are we being beasts? I just was working with a client. In fact, it was the healthcare client, the one who's trying to create transparency, much greater transparency in healthcare. And he wanted to take a moral risk of, it had to do a technological moral risk. It's too complicated for me, a non-technologist, to explain. I'm sure your audience could understand it quite simply if I were to try to explain it. But it was having all sorts of people use the same equipment and still protect information inside it. In any case, he pushed very hard for this to happen. He saw that he was going to lose his senior team if he continued pushing, and pulled back. And so you have to be wise about your moral risk. And you can start taking a moral risk, and if you see it's going to backfire, pull back. That's a normal thing. You don't have to come from the humanities to see that. But generally, when people start taking a moral risk, it's a kind of all-in play. And they get that sort of poker player sensibility. I'm all in. I'm going to throw everything I have at it. You have to reserve some part of yourself to know when to pull back. It has to be a small part. You can't become too afraid because then you won't take the moral risk at all. But you have to do that. uh, and the third thing, which I know is one of the things that interests you, Deepak, we always recommend that before you engage in serious moral risk taking, you look at your culture and you build a strong culture first. You build a culture that has a shared mood of either hope, where everybody comes to work wanting to make a breakthrough, or a shared mood of admiration where people love the customers and love the people they're working with, really do. A mood of zeal where you have a mission and everybody comes to work every day to achieve that mission. For instance, financial transparency. We're going to be making ourselves more transparent today than we were yesterday. We're going to go against the forces that say don't cover that up every day. Or a mood of joy where everybody comes to work to help each other succeed. When you have that in a particular style, say a style of pragmatism, or like Steve Jobs' perfectionism, or opportunity creation, as in sales organizations, you mold those together, you get everybody in the culture living that way. That gives you and the culture the resilience to take the moral risks and to go a little bit further taking the moral risks than you would otherwise go. Why? Because everybody's complicit in the moral risk taking that you take. Uh, so build that strong culture. Back off if it seems to go well, and try to take the smallest moral risk first, and build in your moral risks. In answer to the question, how do you combine convenience and taking infinitely passionate moral risks?
Dr. Charles, how does listening for difference enhance a leader's ability to take more risk and foster a culture of admiration and gratitude?
Okay, there are two main ways. Well, I love listening for difference. For me, there are lots of main ways, but I'll start for your listeners with the two main things that I think it does. First of all, listening for difference enables you to discover the anomaly in your industry or workplace. As a manager, and to become a leader, you generally have to progress up in management. How do you get promoted? Well, in any industry, you get promoted because you know what battles you can fight and win, and you know what battles you have to work around. That's what good managers do. If you think in terms of moral risk taking, you know what you can win, and you know the moral risks to work around. So, for instance, if you're in the utilities industry and you're taking advantage of loyal customers, and that's the backbone of the operating model, you don't try to change that. You try to change everything else, and you try to sweeten that or make it less difficult for loyal customers. And that's what a good manager does. And as you become a better and better manager, there are more and more things like that. And you start seeing this as not something to change at all. There's no reason to change how well you treat loyal customers. And it's only when you listen for difference, when you ask, how would the founder of this industry see these customers, see this situation? How would people outside see this situation? And begin to look at it from their perspective, then you can say, aha, there is an anomaly here. Uh, I mean, people speculate that Winston Churchill saw Hitler as ferocious, not by looking at European history, but by looking at Asian leaders and Asian people who had engaged in warfare, and seeing how they had a kind of religious devotion to conquest, and comparing that to Hitler. And that was how he did it. When I teach people to listen for difference, the key thing in listening for difference is to listen to what somebody says who's different from you, and listen for the words they say that you would never have said, the metaphors they use that they would never have said. And then say, what if those things, which we tend to say those are just oddities or personal idiosyncrasies, what if they're central to the message? Uh, and when you do that, you begin to see how they might see the world in a whole new, different way. Uh, Bear with me. I'm going to tell a real short story from my past as a teacher of literature. When I used to teach literature, I would teach Chaucer, who was an early English poet, and from the Middle Ages. And he wrote a story about a knight and a lady who fell in love, and He says right in the beginning, or she says right in the beginning, she fell in love with the knight because she pitied him. Why did she pity him? Well, she was putting him through all sorts of ordeals, essentially to prove his love, and she pitied the suffering that he felt in those ordeals. I would ask my students, why did the knight fall in love? Why did the lady fall in love with the knight? And the students would say, well, he showed that he was a good partner. He was a hard worker. He was sticking with her through difficulties. They picked out all the things that would matter to them today. And when I'd said, "But look what Chaucer says," and they'd say, "No, that can't be right. That can't be because we know that's not part of love. Pitying the person you love is not a way to love the person." I said, "Well, what if love then was different? Let's explore this." And eventually they'd come around to see that the kind of love that people felt in the Middle Ages was much more like a religious love. And the lady was on a pedestal and she would pity the beloved as though she was a goddess or a god, feeling sorry for the labors of the other person. And when you see love that way, you get a sense of the beginning of romantic love and how different it is. It is that Winston Churchill did with Hitler when he saw that uh, Hitler was not just trying to win battles to regain former German glory. He was winning battles in order to essentially rule the world and do it in the most bloody way he could. That was something different. That was something that a European, certainly somebody in England, could not make sense of. But that was it. And he was only because he was listening for difference that he could see that. Likewise, when Bezos looked at all the boards on the internet in the early 90s, I don't know if any of your listeners can remember that. In the early 90s, the internet wasn't organized by Google or Yahoo or any of the nice organizing things we have. It was lots of boards where you could purchase things, but you didn't know if they were real. You didn't know if you were purchasing something that was completed or not. It was very, very messy. You didn't know if you gave your credit card where it was going. That was the kind of messiness that Bezos saw could lead to the end of the trustworthiness in retail. He had to be able to see that in its fullness, not as a stage that was going to go away. It was only going to go away if someone like Bezos developed an everything store and somebody like Page and Brin developed a way of organizing the uh, the web, the internet. In any case, that's listening for difference, and it enables you to give moral anomalies. It also enables you to understand enemies, as in the uh, Churchill case. Around the board table, when you engage in taking moral risks, some of the people most loyal to you, the people that you started with, don't really get it. They think that when you say, as Anita Roddick did, that she wanted to change the beauty industry by stopping selling to the anxiety of women, but making buying cosmetics and skincare products fun. Everybody thought that, well, yeah, that's a nice line. That's good PR, including her CFO, who was also her husband. But when you're really going to take a risk, they hold back. And it's listening for difference that enables you to see where they're coming from, that they only have a superficial understanding of what you're doing. Those are the two primary virtues or actually capacities that come from listening for difference when you're a leader taking moral risks.
Dr. Charles, the book talks about speaking truth to power. How can leaders cultivate the courage and wisdom to do this effectively without alienating their teams or stakeholders?
That is a really good question. And I'll give you my current answer. I hope to be developing better and better answers because we have so much today that goes against telling truth to power. We live in a sort of post-truth world where leaders are encouraged. In fact, even radical candor is post-truth, where you share your views about things, and the idea that comes out of that is finding the most agreeable view rather than what is true and what you should plant your convictions on. Another way that we avoid truth is with agility, and we try lots of things, we iterate lots of things, and we find out what works, and we just go with what works for as long as it works, and when it stops working, we try other tactics, we try other offerings to people. And so telling truth to power seems a bit quaint, but I find that leaders in business do want to know what the truth of their customers is. What is my central customer segment, and what do they believe, and what am I adding to their life? Who are my employees, and what do they really care about? And what can I add to their lives to enable them to lead good lives? Those are questions about truth that are important questions to ask. Now, your question is, how do you get that inside meetings? How do you make that happen? I'm going to give you two things that are my answers to that. And the first is you show that you are a truth seeker, that you're really seeking truth. You're not seeking to be flattered. And how is it you show that? If you're a leader, do not be afraid of telling the times when you discovered that you were wrong and corrected yourself, and describe how you corrected yourself. I find that fundamental. And don't do it because you want to show that you're vulnerable, as Brene Brown would tell you. It's not about vulnerability at all. Truth seeking and being wrong is not about being vulnerable. It's about showing, I think, how tough you are. I thought this, I did this, I discovered I was wrong, and I changed. That to me is strength. That's not vulnerability. And you can portray it as strength, and you can expect that in your employees. I tell people, in fact, I frequently, people in consulting think it's scary. I tell people in any talk I give, probably 15% of what I say is wrong. It's up to me and you to discover it. And it means you have to be asking always what is true. That is a kind of risky thing for a consultant because people come to consultants, they want 100% certainty that everything is going to be new, unusual, and true. But human life doesn't work that way. And anybody that says it works that way or makes you believe it works that way is misleading you already. We have to make mistakes. If we're stretching the boundary, if we're trying to find something new, we're going to find something wrong. Think of those occasions, if you're a leader, where you were going in one direction, discovered it was wrong, and had to change. If you tell those stories, that cultivates that. The word people like to use today is humility. I don't like to use the word humility. To me, that is persistent truth seeking. That's what it's about. I love the story of Einstein, who, in developing the theory of relativity, set up a series of 5 lectures. I think it was 5 lectures. I tell the story in the book, and I certainly have the number right there. 5 lectures in Berlin, public lectures, where he was going to set out the theory of general relativity. The first one, he got it wrong. Second one, he got it wrong. Third one, he got it wrong. Fourth one, he got it wrong. And David Hilbert was just about to come, the famous mathematician at the time, and deliver what turned out to be the true theory of general relativity. And Einstein gave the 5th lecture and got it right. Just at the same time, David Hilbert got it right. So it's sort of a compelling story, but getting it wrong is part of truth seeking and truth finding. Telling your team how it is that you get it wrong, got it wrong, and made the change. That's an important thing. The other thing is listening to people when they tell you things that you don't want to hear. And asking what's true in that. Asking, listening for difference. Where is this person coming from when they say X or Y or Z? And in fact, that, I have to say, Deepak, is an important part of my coaching. I constantly have senior level people who want to become CEOs, responding to other senior level people by saying, that's wrong, that's mistaken, that can't be. And then giving reasons why they're right and the other person is wrong. That's fine at one level, but you also have to ask, where are they coming from? Why would they see it that way? And if you haven't answered that question, you're not really engaging in leadership because you need to know why they would see it that way. And if looking at it that way is justified, and what does that do? That also forces you to ask, why do I see it the way I see it? Right? I know this set of customers. They know that set of customers. Are these two sets of customers really different? I know how engineering works. They know how sales works. Do you get a really different view of the world when you look at engineering, which is fact-based, and sales, which is aspiration-based? Until you can get flexible at looking from those different perspectives, you can't convince anybody that telling you the truth is not too dangerous. But if people believe that you're going to try to understand where you're coming from when you tell the truth, if people know that you have made mistakes and corrected yourself, those are my two best techniques for getting people to cultivate themselves, speaking truth to power. I keep thinking, too, once you start that, once you get a platform, let's say with your senior team, this is, I'm going to go out on a limb. I believe in my heart that once you get a platform with your senior team, it's going to become attractive and other people are going to want to do it. Uh, I leave it to your listeners and to me to go and see if that's true. I think that's what Ray Dalio did in Bridgewater, the famous hedge fund company, which is for me the beacon of telling truth to power. And he tried to automate it by having everybody know the truths that everybody else is speaking. Uh, I think it becomes attractive in and of itself. After all, our culture, Western culture, had telling truth to power as what you learned if you were educated from about 500 BC to around 1500. So, uh, no, it wasn't that long, till about 600. So a good 1,000 years tradition doing that. So it was catchy at that time.
Dr. Charles, can you explain the concept of lumpy commitments in moral risk taking and how leaders can navigate the challenges involved?
Okay, lumpy commit. The basic idea of a lumpy commitment is it's a big commitment that you're making that you can't easily go back from. The classic case is Boeing investing in the 747. They had to build the infrastructure and everything to create such a large plane. No other aeronautics company was doing anything like it, and so there was no way to sell out once they made the investment. They were stuck. It was either had to make it work or it was going to be a huge loss. That's the notion of a lumpy commitment. Uh, Worked out by a Harvard business economist. It's quite brilliant. I cannot remember his name. It's something Gemwat, I believe, but I think I'm missing a syllable. I apologize to your listeners. Um, I believe most moral risks are lumpy commitments. Uh, I'll give you, again, let's just turn to the Anita Roddick one. Anita Roddick uh, started her first store, sold the family business, sold all the family wealth in order to get that first store going. She got it going in Brighton. This is the Body Shop. They were going to make selling cosmetics and skin treatments fun and give women appreciation for their bodies. But the beauty business thought it was a joke, that it was just for hippies and it wasn't going to drain away many people. She wanted to make growth essential. And so she decided at a moment when her husband went away on business that she alone would sell half the shares of the store to get the money to build a second store. That is a lumpy commitment. If the second store doesn't succeed, her family falls apart, could fall apart, and she wouldn't have any excess cash to invest in the first business if it hit a tough moment. She could have lost everything. That is a classic lumpy commitment. Moral risks are like that. I say, as I described earlier, you need to be able to ask, am I being abused? Am I being abused? Can you pull it back? But at a certain point, when you're taking moral commitments, you're not able to pull it back, and you have to go all the way, all in with that commitment and make it work. And the same was true when Julia Robertson uh, had to terminate the people who were not in favor of letting go of clients who would not develop her temp workers. She had to do that with 2 or 3 big clients. That was huge. And it meant that the company had to put all its effort into finding replacement clients who would develop workers. If she didn't have the entire company behind her, or what remained when she got rid of people behind her, she could have lost the company. So it had to be all in at that point. And those are the kinds of lumpy commitments that moral risk taking entails.
The book emphasizes building an economy of gratitude. How does this concept transform the way leaders engage with employees, customers, and communities?
Again, thanks, Deepak, for asking that question. That's a question that I'm always desperate for people to ask. People think it is not a well-developed part of the book, and for me, it's an essential part of the book and covers a lot of ground. So let me say, what's the opposite from an economy of gratitude? In the old days, when we looked at leaders, we tended to see leaders as people who understood their businesses as a whole, understood customers really well. And as somebody working in those businesses, what did we owe them? We owed them obedience. They had the best understanding. And if they told us what to do, we should go do it. Yes, they could be wrong here and there, but by and large, they would be right. And you can see that today in certain surgical teams where you have a star surgeon. Uh, the star surgeon you take as right. He knows what he or she is doing. Likewise, certain police units, military units, and even small businesses that line your street. The founder who started the business, who knows most of the customers on a first name basis, who's been doing it for years, has a pretty good instinct. And so if you go there, you're obedient. My leaders, the leaders I talk about, the ones that create masterpieces, and masterpieces are these morally distinctive companies, don't know everything. They're the ones who have taken moral risks and succeeded. And what happens when somebody takes a moral risk and succeeds? They do something that we initially think is wrong or not quite right, and then it makes our life better. The person who invented the idea of moral risk was a philosopher named Bernard Williams, and tells a great story. And I'll tell that story, and then I'll say what it looks like with Jeff Bezos. He tells the story of Gauguin, who is a famous artist, a post-impressionist artist. I hope most of your listeners can picture Gauguin's paintings. Uh, Gauguin, as Bernard Williams' version of the story goes, it's slightly different from the actual life. Was a struggling artist in Paris in, let's say, the 1880s. He had a wife and he had 5 children. And he was struggling. He was managing ends where he was making ends meet, but he wasn't doing well. And he had the intuition, and it was just an intuition, that if he could get out of his bourgeois middle class surroundings, just totally get out of those surroundings, he could paint great art that would change the way people thought about how they lived. And he did. He followed his intuition. He abandoned his family, which was shocking, morally shocking, the wrong thing to do, and went to Tahiti. And in Tahiti, he painted women in an earthy, relaxed way that nobody in the Parisian middle class could imagine. And if you've seen the paintings, they're faintly erotic. They are definitely relaxed. They're very earthy paintings. And what did they do? They changed the way people thought about life. They thought that it could be good to be more erotic, more relaxed, more earthy in life. And it's now part of what we value. Even those of us who are middle class, we value that. And it changed us. And how do we feel towards Gauguin? Well, the first question is, did he do the right thing? And those of us who have been changed by those paintings have to say, yes, he did do the right thing. There was collateral damage, and we're sorry for the collateral damage or the damage to the children and the wife. But he did the right thing. And how do we feel about that? I think our natural feeling towards that art is gratitude. And that's why I say it's an economy of gratitude. Let's take another case. Let's take the commercial case of Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos creates the everything store, and it does exactly what he set out to do. It makes buying and selling on the internet safe and comfortable. You're buying fixed things for a fixed price from a vendor that you can know and trust. What could be better? Well, if you experience Amazon, particularly in the early days, if you were to buy anything other than a book, but even a book, you had to wait for it to be mailed to you. And that was it. And if you were buying clothing, you don't really know how it's going to look on you until you actually try it on in real life. Looking at it on camera, or a picture of it doesn't tell you. So there's that anxiety. How's it going to look on me? How long is it going to take? And what happens if I don't like it? And notice what Jeff Bezos did. He didn't say, well, my business model beats all of that. I've got lower prices. I've got virtually everything anybody would ever want. That's all anybody should ever ask me for, right? That's people without facing the moral anomaly. I'm creating anxiety over the mailing time and return. He focused on that. And now Amazon sends things to you really, really quickly, has an exquisitely simple return policy. That's because he's taking that extra step. And and he's trying to create an economy of gratitude. And when I ask people now, what's great about Amazon, almost nobody says to me, oh, it's a great business model. Their prices are lower, it's an everything store. They say things come really quickly. And the return policy is very, very simple. And how do they feel about that? They feel gratitude towards that. He didn't need to do that. That's over and above. I'm grateful. And that's the economy I'm talking about. And I think that the kind of convenience that Bezos and now Jassy is bringing into our lives, it's beginning to pervade everything. It's when I'm in my small Upper East Side, New York, French restaurant, neighborhood restaurant, if they don't bring me the bill in Amazon time, I think there's something wrong. And I think there's something wrong even if they give me an extra glass of Bordeaux to make up for not bringing the bill in time. And so that's how the gratitude influences our lives. And that's the economy I think we will move into if business leaders really focus on creating masterpieces where they listen for the moral anomaly. They answer the moral anomaly by doing what they love. They take the moral risks necessary, and they create a very distinctive organization to do it. I think we'll feel gratitude for that. If you look at the cover of my book, which is in the background, you see all the palaces lining the Grand Canal. That's my picture. All those separate palaces are all the separate businesses in our lives. They become palatial, and we admire them, and we feel grateful for them as we walk by them.
Dr. Charles, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. In what ways can conventional leadership development programs integrate insights from the humanities to foster leaders capable of morally risky, masterpiece creating leadership?
Okay, my first thought is to recommend that they read my book and work on it. I summarize my book in this way. There are three questions that leaders to ask leaders and that leaders should ask. You've already heard one of them. Number one, What always goes wrong in your industry or your company, even when the business model is working? You just did Jeff Bezos. There's a delay in getting things. What would you love to do instead? By the way, that's the one I find leaders, because they come from management and they're brilliant managers, have the hard time answering. What would you love to do instead? And then what risks will you need to take to achieve that? And let's order them from smallest risk to largest risk. Now, in order to be able to answer those questions and act on those questions, you're going to need to develop a company that has a great mood, a great shared mood. And that has to do with developing certain practices inside the company that has that mood. That means you have to listen for the mood and manage the mood all the time. When people are not in a good mood, you have to say, what mood are you in? And get that out. You have to learn to listen for difference. You have to learn to show off, manifest your virtues. Remember when I spoke about truth saying, my answer was, if you want people to tell you the truth, you want them to seek truth, you have to show that you're a truth seeker. And the easiest way to show that you're a truth seeker is show how you continued seeking truth when you got it wrong. That's manifesting virtues. One of the virtues you need to manifest is, as I say, seeking truth, and then having the courage to speak the truth. On the basis of the courage to speak the truth, people can get used to having a leader that's going to take moral risks and has the courage to take moral risks. All of those are elements, I believe, of creating a good life. And what's a good life? A good life is one where you experience wonder. And that means where you yourself, in whatever rank in the business you are able to take a moral risk. Because when you take a moral risk, succeed or fail, there's almost a moment of wonder. Wow, this is what happens when I do this. And that's my simple answer. It's sort of summarized inside the book.
Listeners, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Charles Spinosa for joining us as today's distinguished guest and sharing his wisdom on the art and impact of leadership. Drawing on over 2 decades at the forefront of management consulting, Dr. Spinosa's insights have given us a deeper understanding of how moral risk-taking leadership and bold cultural transformation can rise organizations to new heights, setting benchmark in profitability and stakeholder value. Thank you, Dr. Spinosa, for inspiring our audience to pursue excellence and meaningful impact, both as a leaders and lifelong learners. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Thanks a lot for letting me speak to your audience as well. I really appreciate it.